We are also buying land, large tracts of land in Brazil, in Kenya, and Ethiopia. These are the places. China has bought them in about 20 other countries. They're way ahead of us in that absolute race to the bottom. Now, it's very curious that India should say, it's very, very curious that India should say that we are going to buy farmland in Ethiopia to grow food in India, considering, and this is part of the economics of our time, we shifted millions and millions of farmers in the last 20 years from the cultivation of food crop to the cultivation of cash crop. Okay? Millions of subsistence level farmers, small farmers, medium farmers, guys with 5 to 9 acres, been shifted from going food crop like paddy, like rice, like wheat, to growing vanilla for you, because you are the vanilla nation. 70% of the world's consumption of vanilla is right here. Okay? 70% of the coffee India produces, the Robusta. As you know, there are two families of coffee, Robusta and Arabica. So we produce mostly Robusta. 70% of our Robusta is consumed in Europe, not in India. So the farmers are getting into very high-risk zones because they don't have an internal market. They're being shifted to very high-risk crops. If you move from producing paddy to producing vanilla, as many people did in 2003, so I'm giving you the 2003 figure, your cost of cultivation goes up 16 times. The bank loans you take go up accordingly. And banks will not give you that amount of loans, so you take it from money lenders. We shifted millions. And what is the result of that? How many of you have looked at the Indian budget, the latest budget online? Economic survey online? I'll save you the time so that you don't have to dig through it. There's a table 1.17, under the table section, page A17 to 22. What does it show you? It shows you that the average per capita availability of food grain, 2005 to 2009, is less than it was in 1955 to 1959. 436 grams for the last 5 years, 444 grams in 1955 to 59. That's about 3 million tons in real terms. Okay. In 1991, we reached a peak of production when we had 510 grams per Indian. That's when we started what they call the reforms. From 510 grams, you've come to 436 grams in 20 years. It means that the average Indian family has access to about 100 kilograms of grain less than they did just 10 years ago. That's how serious the food crisis is. We are still encouraging crops for export in the name of an economics that says grow cash crops, make hard currency dollars, and do better. So that's what's happened. By the way, food and hunger issues have grown massively in a country called the United States. According to the USDA, that is the United States Department of Agriculture, it brings out a report on food security in the United States, 2009. If you look at that report, it shows you some very spectacular things. 2009 marks the highest number of people ever in food insecurity in the United States since they started doing the surveys in 1995. It marks the highest. One of every 7 American households had difficulty providing food to all their members in 2009, according to the US Department of Agriculture study. 1/3 of these families had very low food security. What does that mean? It means members in 6 million households had reduced food intake or completely disrupted eating patterns due to lack of money to buy food. Over 36% of all female-headed households in the United States, that is, with children, female-headed households with children, that means more than one household in every 3, more than 1 in every 3 female-headed households with children in the United States were declared food insecure by the USDA's report. Black and Hispanic households were more than twice as likely to be food insecure than including white non-Hispanic households. 5.6 million households an increase of 18% over the previous year, were going to soup kitchens. And it isn't just the United States. I came to the United States via Brussels. What is Brussels? Heart of EU, heart of NATO, one of the most prosperous nations in Europe. Top 20 of the Human Development List. You know what the figures out there are? 1 in every 3 women entrepreneurs in entire Belgium is below the poverty line of the European Union and below the poverty line of Belgium as well. The Flanders Daily had this splendid news item on this subject. Inequality has grown faster in the last 15 years than at any time in the preceding 50 anywhere in the world. In the United States, 2009 brought the number of people below the poverty line to 43.6 million. In this country, the crisis has about 1 in every 4 children is below the poverty line, and 22%, over 1 in 5 of every American below the age of 18 is hungry or at risk of being hungry. Do you know one of the most interesting examples cited about inequality in the US is if you compare it to, say, Argentina. Okay? In the 1940s, Argentina was one of the most unequal countries in the world. 1% of Argentina's population controlled 20% of incomes. Today, that's down to 15%. But United States 2007, 1% of the population controlled 24% of the national income. That is, the United States in 2007 is more unequal than Argentina in the mid-1940s. Yet, in the same country, despite the crisis, despite your recession, would anyone like to give me a number on what the top 10 hedge fund managers are earning per hour? $900,000. And then come to the champion in grooming inequality in our continent, that's us. As I said, my favorite list is Forbes, right? It shows us now that we have $55 billionaires. There are a few inconveniences in that we are ranked 4th, above us, the usual irritating faces of China and Russia. The Chinese I will dismiss briefly because their average net worth of their billionaires is a piffling $2 billion. Ours is 4.5. Okay? It used to be 6.5 until those twits on Wall Street blew it for everybody in 2008. As for the Russians, there is our obvious moral superiority over the Russians, because the Russians, after 10 years, send all their billionaires to prison. We send ours to Parliament, where now we have about 11 of them. Okay? So that's a civilized democracy. We send them to Parliament. The corporate giveaway in the current Indian budget is what? 18 to 19 billion dollars in direct corporate income tax. And if you add other corporate concessions under excise and customs, it crosses 100 billion US dollars. According to UNDP, that's the amount you require every year to solve all the basic problems of the human race. Right? But the same Indian budget cuts 4,500 million rupees from food security. Last year, the same amount, nearly 10,000 million rupees, have disappeared in 24 months from food subsidies in a country which has the largest number of hungry people in the world. Lastly, and I'm going to close on this note, what did it do? These policies, I said food crisis and farm crisis. I brought you to the farmland. All over the world, the policies of giant corporations getting massive subsidies. In the United States, 7 out of every $10 going in farm subsidies goes to Fortune 500 companies. Okay? There are very few farmers in the United States. The family farms left in the United States are less than 700,000. That's a 2006 figure. And they were going bankrupt at the rate of 160 a week, according to the Associated Press. By the way, it means that you've got 3 times the number of people in prison as you do in farming. Count it. Federal, state, penitentiaries, and parole, if you include the parole. The people in the criminal justice system under restraint are 3 times the number of people you have on the farms of this country. In India, the gigantic subsidies of the United States and EU and destroyed millions of farmers in Western Africa, in the cotton producing countries, because all these people had been shifted, remember, to cash crop in India and elsewhere. So this system of economics, the system of subsidies, basically the system of running the world by corporations, has really caused damage. In India, the last 15 years, from 1995, have seen the death by suicide of over 200,000 farmers. If you include 2 years of 95-96, it comes to nearly 250,000. That means, and suppose we divide these figures into two halves, in the second half, the number of deaths is much, much higher. Very much higher. It means it's getting worse, not getting better. 250,000 human beings is the largest recorded wave of suicides in human history. They may have been bigger, but they're not recorded. These are recorded by the government of India. They have huge exclusions of large numbers of people, and they still come to 216,500 if we take the period from 97 to 2009. All these data are available to you online. They are the data of what is called the National Crime Records Bureau. The Crime Records Bureau keeps data on suicides. In India, suicide is a crime. You commit it, we'll teach you never to do it again. And if we take the 95-96 figures, which are incomplete because many states did not report, and if we take 2010, an average figure, way below the average of the last 6 years, then you cross 250,000. That's how the figures work. It means that in the last 6 years, the rate of suicides is one farmer taking his or her life every 30-31 minutes. That's the scale of human distress. That's the scale of, oh yeah, but it creates unique buying opportunities. You can buy farmland in India now. Yeah? It creates unique Unfortunately, our legislation does not allow corporations to hold vast tracts of agricultural land. But don't worry, that will change. They're lobbying for it. Now you have the same country that has $55 billionaires. $55 billionaires. That's Forbes. Let's take the government of India's report. We don't want to always be with Forbes. The government of India constituted 3 committees between 2007 and 2010. For my sins, I was a member of one of those committees. The first committee was National Commission for Enterprises on Unorganized Sector. First page of the report is online. You can reach it in moments. It's called NCEUS Report on Livelihoods and Poverty. Headed by Arjun. Now you might ask, why should a government have several reports and committees on the same subject, right? On farm suicides, there are 13 commissions of inquiry in the state of Maharashtra alone. Indian governments have a very specific way of functioning on inquiry commissions. They will set up multiple inquiry commissions until one of them gives the government the report it wants to hear. So the first commission they set up under a very safe tutelage of Professor Arjun Sen Gupta, a veteran of the World Bank, IMF, Planning Commission. With those sort of credentials, they thought he would say all was wonderful, India is shining. Arjun Sen Gupta ended up putting on the first page of his report, 836 million Indians live on less than 50 cents a day. 20 rupees or less. Incidentally, if you live on less than 20 rupees in India a day, you don't qualify as poor. To qualify as poor, you've got to live on less than 11 rupees a day, because that's the poverty line in India. Okay? So if you manage less, so 836 million people, less than 20. So they were disgusted with this report, which also said 88% of all Adivasis, all tribals, 88% of all Dalits, and 85% of all Muslims fall into this category of ultra poor. So they set up a second commission, the NC Saxena BPL expert group. I was one of the experts. And it was wonderful. It was scintillating. Some of the expert discussions we had were riveting.